In the films, the Gondor armies really seemed very, very inadequate. But today, I've been looking at a couple of sources and I'm going to be trying to answer the question, just how big was Gondor's army? Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. This is Gone with Gandalf, and every single Friday I make these lore videos, and it is very cold and I can see my own breath. It is very much within my best interest to make this as concise as possible, so off we go. Vague is very much the word of the day, and Tolkien was very vague about the figures, but the figures that we definitely do know are looking at the siege of Gondor in the city of Minas Tirith. Of course, Pippin was there to see the folks or the forces of the Outlands or the fiefs of Gondor come in to support Minas Tirith before the forces of Sauron came in. So you had 200 men from Lasarnak, 300 men from the Ringlow Vale, 500 bowmen from Morthond, 300 from Pinath-Gelin, then you had 700 men-at-arms and a company of knights from Dol Amroth, and then you had some hundreds from the Thir Anduin, Anfalas and Lamadon, and all of this would come to less than 3,000 men. Now those aren't the only forces that would have been in Minas Tirith. You would have also had the company from Henethanoon that Faramir had commanded, and that would have been then sent to Osgiliath. Now at Osgiliath they suffered egregious losses because it is said that the orcs swarmed like beetles over the defenders, and they were beaten back then to the Rammas Ekor and the Causeway forts that kind of surround or defend Minas Tirith from the road from Osgiliath. And following that defeat as well, they then would retreat into Minas Tirith. Now that number would definitely have been in the hundreds at least, but to get a better impression of just how many that could have been, another source is called into question. So Karen Wynne Fonstad, the author of the Atlas of Middle-earth, she has an estimate that at the Battle of Minas Tirith there were 11,250 men for the forces of good. Now we know that 6,000 of that number were the Rohirrim. This is known from the Unfinished Tales, and I'm not going to go too much into that because that would really require its own video, but this is not the full muster of the Rohirrim, and it's actually only 50%. So they have 12,000 riders ready in the army of Rohan. Now you would think that Gondor would have had a much larger part of this grand army, but apparently not. It would have only been 5,250 according to this then, and 3,000 of that would have been the defenders from all over the lands. Then you had 300 from the Citadel Guard, because it was known that there were 3 companies of the Citadel Guard. Now that is a point of contention. I don't actually know how many men are in a company. You could say it's 100, you could say it's 150. Now Tolkien of course was in the army, but I don't know how much stock you really want to put into that, because you know he calls everyone a captain, and not everyone can be a captain, and captain's not even the highest rank. Like Aragorn is the captain of the West, then you've got Faramir, the captain of Gondor, then you've got Boromir, the captain of Gondor, then you've got an Uruk-hai, captain of Isengard, and then you've got the Witch King, he's the captain of, I don't know, the Nazgul. So, you know, everyone's a captain. So I don't think he necessarily knew just how many would have been in a company either. But let's just say that there's 300. That brings up the total to 3,300 or thereabouts. And then about 1,000 more then would have been the garrison and the forces of Faramir, to kind of bring that up to 4,250. Now that leaves us still with a deficit of about 1,000, and that is because Aragorn brought up 1,000 also men from Pelargir by the boats, and these were the boats that were meant to have been coming from Umbar, from the bad guys down there, the Haradrim. And he of course defeated those forces with the army of the dead, and this is kind of a lowball figure because well, again, no one really knows what the true figure would be, but I'm deciding to go a bit lower on the estimate. Aragorn, of course, was fearing that he would never make it to Minas Tirith before it would fall, so he was kind of trying to make sure that he'd got there as soon as possible, and so he was in quite a rush. But nevertheless, there were other forces on their way from there, but I'll get to that in just a moment, because let's talk about the Black Gate, because there's another set of figures that we do actually know of and is mentioned in the text, and we don't have to guess so much. So that is about the Black Gate, and it is said that 7,000 men left and travelled from Minas Tirith towards the Black Gate. Following the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, Eomer said that not 4,000 of his riders were battle ready. So about 3,500-ish, shall we say, were battle ready and would then march out towards the Black Gate. So that's half of the 7,000, and let's not forget that he had 6,000 originally. So they did suffer a lot of casualties, as did the Gondorians. So it's 50-50 there. Now, of course, 6,000 made it to the Black Gate, because 1,000 then went to Caerandros and they decided to turn back there. But Minas Tirith was said to be better defended now as they left for the Black Gate than before the siege happened. So we can look at some more figures there and kind of guess that perhaps there was about 5,000 as opposed to the 4,250 that there were before. But at this point, you might ask, where are these extra numbers coming from? But when Aragorn, when he sailed from Pelargir, he told Angbor the Fearless, he said to his 4,000 men, you guys need to now march up to Minas Tirith as soon as possible, but we don't have enough boats for you, basically. So that is where they are, that's where the extra numbers have come from. And the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and the Battle at the Black Gate, those were 10 days apart, so they definitely did have the time to actually march up to Minas Tirith from Lebanon. I do apologise, there are a lot of numbers, but that brings up the total to about 8,500 Gondorians that are present for the Black Gate and the Pelennor Fields. But, you know, there's a bit more to it, because if you remember Lasarnak, they presented, 200 men. That was said to have been less than 10% of what the people at Minas Tirith were expecting from them prior to the siege. So if that is correct, then, you know, that's 2,000 men as opposed to 200. So you can add that to the total. Then, you know, the Aether, Anduin and Lebanon, they provided some hundreds. You know, that's very little in the grand scheme of things, particularly if Lasarnak has 2,000 men, and that's not a massive region. Sure, you know, like some of them would have probably been counted in the 4,000 that were at Pelargir, because that's kind of the area that they're in. But if we look at like Lamadon, the Blackroot Vale in Morthond, Pinethgelin, Anfalas, Dol Amroth, none of these regions are particularly close to Pelargir, so I don't know if you would really count their forces to have been present in that 4,000. So like Rohan, they give 50% of their total manpower, and okay, sure, they were the biggest allies, so that's probably to be expected. And also, you know, Saruman was defeated. They had no threats in the west from Dunland either. It was all coming from Mordor, so sure, but still that's only 50%. So if we look in comparison then at Gondor's second largest and greatest ally, that would have been her fief in Dol Amroth, and they gave 700 men plus the knights plus their prince. I'd imagine that 700 would have been quite a large percentage. Sure, it wouldn't have been 50%, maybe it would have been like 30% or something like that. But they still had the threat from Umbar. They had to defend their land from the sea. Like, what good is it if all your army then marches to Minas Tirith only for your women and children just to get slaughtered and put into slavery and things like that? So would they have then had 2,000 in reserve? And then if you look at Lamadon, they were part of the some hundreds in conjunction with Amplas and the Aether Anduin. They didn't even send a captain. They had no leader. And surely, even if Lamadon is kind of like akin to like Scotland and they were all tribesmen, they would have still had leaders. So what were the leaders doing? Did they have something better to do? Probably. They were probably leading their own armies down in their areas, perhaps aiding out Anfalas. So that's probably where they were with the greatest bulk of their numbers, and this is just like a ragtag bunch that they sent along. So again, there you've got several hundreds, thousands, perhaps, that they could muster for the greater Gondorian army. And then suddenly, with all these fiefs added together, you've got, you're certainly doubling that 8,500 total that you had before. So that's quite good. That's 17,000, and that's getting quite up there. But if Rohan had 12,000 in total, you would have expected Gondor to be far larger, because Gondor, it's a more established realm. They've got a higher standard of living. They've got much better cities and towns, infrastructure, things like that. So you're going to have more people, and you're going to have a larger army. And then that brings into question, what about the figure that Karen Wynne Fonstad said in the Atlas of Middle-earth? Because if Rohan is outnumbering Gondor's forces, at the largest battle of the age, at the city of Gondor, where the fighting is going to be the most important, how is Gondor allowing herself to be outnumbered by their ally when, it's not even their city? So perhaps that figure that I earlier said of Aragorn with his sailing only 1,000 men up the Anduin from Pelargir, I said that was lowball. Perhaps that was more like 3,000 rather than the 1,000, as I've seen others mention in their estimates. And that would certainly be more of the wow factor, like OMG. Like, remember in the films when the army of the dead show up, and it's like, you think, oh, it's definitely lights out now for the good guys and Minas Tirith is definitely going to fall. Well, the 3,000 is a much greater number than just 1,000. So perhaps that would be, better. Additionally, the Mouth of Sauron did say that the rabble of Gondor should remove themselves from the field and go over the river and never attack Mordor again. They didn't say Gondor and Rohan, suggesting that Gondor is the far greater power and that their army in general is far, far larger than Rohan's, which was 12,000. Obviously, at this battle, they were roughly equal, but if you think, there's some kind of mental gymnastics required here, and the Mouth of Sauron certainly would have had a lot of good information there. So rather than just being, equal partners, they were definitely like the chief belligerent. Or was it just that he sees that Aragorn is there, and he, as once again, the captain of the West, he is therefore the focal point, and he, as the king of Gondor, he is then also the main focus, and Gondor is greater than Rohan, despite the numbers being more equal. I don't know, I probably went on a bit too much about that. But finally, if we go back to Imrahil and what he said of the 7,000 soldiers that travelled towards the Black Gate, and how that was barely a vanguard for Gondor at the peak of its powers. Does that not show just how much Gondor has fallen? Like, in the 2,000 or so years, this is all that she has to show. Basically, vanguard, or a vanguard in a medieval army, was the portion of an army that was in front of the main bulk, and that would typically have been about a third of its total size. So 3 times 7, 21,000-ish. And I think that is pretty fitting, really, because that is also the number then that several other estimates have come up with. It's about 20,000. So if you add in the 8,500 that I previously said were at the Pelennor Fields and then went on to the Black Gate, then you've got all these additional forces from all across Gondor, perhaps bumping that up to about 17,000. And if Aragorn actually had more than the 1,000 showing up at Minas Tirith, maybe it was 3,000, then you've got around the ballpark, in the margin of error of 20,000 thousand. So all of this is largely just guessing, largely just estimates, but I hope that it is somewhat interesting to hear about all this, and I am very much looking forward to see your comments in the comment section down below. But thank you very much for watching this far, and please do like and subscribe. And I'd just like to make a final announcement at the end of this video. If you are still watching, you are most likely going to have been subscribed. Thank you very much. At the point of me recording this in a very, very chilly conservatory, I think I had 992 subscribers. So I'm very, very close to that 1,000 mark. And the 1,000 mark is substantial because at that point you can have a monetized channel. So thank you very much for all the support there. And I'm going with Gandalf. Good day. Okay, I'm going to see if I can see my own breath for the camera. Okay, it's not working, and I just look like an idiot.